Hello and welcome to the Anatomy of Achievement. This is the podcast where we dissect all things achievement. I'm your host, Kiara, psychology graduate and head scientist in this lab. In today's lab, we are dissecting the what, how, and why of imposter syndrome. As achievers, we are so often pushed into places we might not feel we deserve, and that's because we're almost always growing, pushing, expanding. It is so common to experience imposter syndrome as an achiever, and that's why I chose this as the first topic of the podcast. We'll start the podcast with an understanding of what imposter syndrome actually is, how it operates, and how it affects us. And finally, we'll delve into practical solutions for dealing with imposter syndrome and experiences of imposter thoughts. First, we start with what. What is imposter syndrome? Now, for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to split imposter syndrome into two separate definitions. One I'll call traditional and the other I will call cultural. First, there's the traditional, original psychological phenomenon, and then there is the cultural definition, which I believe is more culturally understood as imposter syndrome in the context of the social media age. We'll start with the traditional understanding, and that is the term imposter syndrome is a development of the original term imposter phenomenon, which was coined in 1978 by Dr. Clance and described the experience of high-achieving individuals feeling like frauds even with evidence for their success and attributing their achievements to external factors rather than their own abilities. I'll say it again so you don't have to rewind, you're welcome. The experience of high-achieving individuals feeling like frauds even with evidence for their successes and attributing their achievements to external factors rather than their own abilities. Now, there's a lot there, but basically the original explanation is that these high achievers believed that they were not as competent as others perceived them to be. Now, as of this episode, the consensus of the research has any combination of the following three experiences to classify experiencing imposter syndrome. 1, the inability to believe your achievement or position is deserved. 2, persistent self-doubt despite evidence to the contrary. And 3, attributing your achievements to external factors or luck, which can lead to a fear of being found out for being inadequate. Now, that is the more traditional research phenomenon definition of imposter syndrome. On the other hand, the second cultural version, I'm drawing from not only personal experience, but also just listening to other people, especially high achievers, refer to imposter syndrome in context. Essentially, what I believe imposter syndrome is understood to mean in our culture of social media. So the second definition I'm offering is the experience of choosing to be in a position or choosing to accept an opportunity for which you are not deserving based on the comparison to others. This is different to the quote-unquote traditional imposter syndrome for two fundamental reasons. 1, you have chosen to be in that role or accept that opportunity. And 2, your belief for whether or not you are deserving is based on comparison to others. I'm going to share an example to put the two definitions into context. In 1978, when the original definition came out, there was no waking up and going on your phone and seeing the intricacies of millions of people's lives, whereas now almost everyone's life is pretty much transparent within 5 clicks. So let's say you're in 1978, you live in a small town where you know 200 people and you have always been the best cross-country runner in the town. Because of this, you choose to become the head coach of the cross-country team in the town. One of your athletes qualifies for the Olympics and you are suddenly experiencing thoughts that you're not deserving of being an Olympic cross-country coach. But you are, and the evidence is there. You coach this athlete to be an Olympian. You are an Olympian coach. Now, to confirm the faulty belief that you are undeserving, you attribute that evidence to luck. It is simply lucky that your athlete qualified and that you were their coach. This situation exemplifies the traditional psychological phenomenon and more research-based definition. Now we take that same situation but put it into today's context. You've always been the best cross-country runner in your town. You choose to become the cross-country coach. You are offered the opportunity to be an Olympic coach, and you choose to accept this opportunity. You then check Instagram to see what the other coaches have been up to. And for every Olympic coach's profile you click on, you're seeing training styles you've never tried, qualifications you've never heard of, and for every click, you are reinforcing the glass ceiling between yourself and the person you are low-key stalking. You suddenly start experiencing thoughts that you are undeserving of this position that you've chosen to put yourself in because of comparing yourself to the other coaches. So in this example, you've compared yourself to someone else, and as a result, your metric for being deserving has changed. In the same sense, if you personally accept an opportunity or position in your field and you feel this overwhelming sense of, I'm not good enough, look at all these other people who are smarter, more qualified, more talented, that's what I believe our culture considers to be imposter syndrome. So in the episode today, I'll note which type of imposter syndrome I'm referring to, because although they share similar psychological mechanisms like feelings of unworthiness and self-doubt, there are some distinct mechanisms like comparison which are just applicable to the cultural imposter syndrome. Speaking of mechanisms, we will now dissect how imposter syndrome actually works and, more importantly, how it affects us. Like I explained earlier, the shared mechanisms of both types of imposter syndrome are the cognitions, that is, the thoughts present when you're experiencing imposter syndrome. They are, I am unworthy and I am not deserving. These cognitions and beliefs can become part of a self-fulfilling prophecy through what's called confirmation bias, which occurs when your mind searches for evidence to confirm and support your beliefs. Confirmation bias is like a cognitive sieve or filter which takes in all the perceptive stimuli and only lets through the perceptions that confirm your beliefs and interprets all the ambiguous perceptions to match that belief. Note that ambiguous perceptions are perceptions that don't have an obvious meaning. They are open to interpretation, like that blue/grey dress that broke the internet in 2015. If you know, you know. That is ambiguous because it's not exactly clear what the meaning is, and it's open to interpretation. I'll give you an example. If you believe you have the cognition and the belief that you are the most attractive person to ever grace this earth, then you will be hyper aware to things that would confirm this. Like if someone glances at you, you'll interpret that ambiguous stimulus to support your belief. So you'd think, oh, they looked at me because I'm the most attractive person to ever grace this earth, regardless of whether or not that's the reality or they were just looking at the clock behind you. In the same sense, if your beliefs and cognitions when experiencing imposter syndrome are, I am not deserving or I am unworthy, then you most probably interpret ambiguous things to confirm that and search for other evidence to confirm that belief. For example, you tell your colleague that you got a promotion and they respond with, wow, you're only 23 and you got that promotion. You would likely interpret this to mean, oh, am I not old enough or experienced enough to accept this position? Which would confirm the belief that you are unworthy. So in this way, the combination of faulty cognition, I'm unworthy, and confirmation bias, evidence, not really evidence, that I'm unworthy, can become its own perpetuating cycle, which is challenging to become aware of in the first place and is also quite challenging to break out of. Now, if we consider the traditional phenomenon mechanisms on their own, in that mechanism, there is evidence to contradict the faulty cognitions that you have, i.e., there is evidence that you are deserving and you are unworthy. However, in response to that evidence, to preserve your belief, the rationalization is external, that your successes are pure luck or someone else is responsible for those successes. Consider the Olympic coach example. The evidence is that your athlete has qualified for the Olympics and you are their coach. But through faulty cognitions and confirmation bias, you might explain this evidence to be pure luck, or maybe that your coaching didn't play a big role in the qualification and it's just all the athlete that did it. On the other end, we have the mechanisms which are applicable to only the cultural imposter syndrome, which is comparison to others. And this is what this imposter syndrome operates on and is perpetuated by. Now, there is a collection of research which suggests that those who experience imposter syndrome compare themselves more frequently to others in the context of their perceived flaws, which feeds into self-doubt. So not only are we in the business of waking up and consuming content about other people's lives, we are also then filtering that to compare our perceived flaws to their apparent flawlessness. This links the mechanism of comparison to the confirmation bias. Now let's run that back to being an Olympic coach with imposter syndrome and access to social media. If you are viewing the other coaches' profiles, you're not looking at how they rehabilitate their athletes and saying, yeah, I'm much better in that domain. Instead, all of your attention is focused on the things that you think you're worse at than them, the things that make you less deserving. In conclusion of dissecting the mechanisms of imposter syndrome, we can see that experiencing imposter syndrome can greatly impact what we believe about ourselves and our abilities. Let's delve further into this with our next dissection. How does imposter syndrome affect us? In short, imposter syndrome hijacks our beliefs and holds them prisoner with faulty confirmative evidence. Our beliefs are integral to how we live our lives and to every decision that we make. There is long-standing research by Bandura, who is the titan of social learning, which suggests that feelings of unworthiness can have a significant impact on a person's self-efficacy. I'll say it again. Feelings of unworthiness can have a significant impact on a person's self-efficacy. Your self-efficacy is the confidence in your own abilities to accomplish objectives and overcome challenges. Now, imposter syndrome leads to low self-efficacy. So essentially, we don't believe we are capable of accomplishing objectives or overcoming challenges. This concept was demonstrated in more recent research, which suggests that people experiencing imposter syndrome may avoid challenging tasks or opportunities, and they were also found to be less likely to approach for promotions in a workplace context. Now, if you heard me raise my intonation at the end of that sentence, I said context. It's because it's really important what I just said. I intentionally added that study which measured people approaching for promotions because in my head, that is a direct display of what you believe you are worth. In order to ask for a promotion, you must have the certainty that you are worth more than what you are being rewarded, that you value yourself more than your current rate of pay. Hence, this study so clearly demonstrated that those experiencing imposter syndrome essentially valued themselves less than their counterpart. In sum, imposter syndrome affects our confidence in ourselves. Now, if we're breaking it down further to look at just the traditional imposter syndrome, it specifically affects one's sense of achievement. So a major part of this imposter syndrome is the tendency to attribute successes to external factors rather than internal abilities or just plain hard work and effort. Naturally, in doing this, your sense of achievement is undermined and in turn offers confirmation for those maladaptive thoughts that we brought up earlier. Now, stepping back and looking at the big picture, we've dissected what imposter syndrome actually is, we can see the mechanics of it, and how it can be an endless cycle which can affect your confidence, your self-efficacy, and whether or not you'll take on challenges or opportunities. Our final dissection of today's lab is on how we can break that imposter syndrome cycle. We'll do this by addressing the mechanics of imposter syndrome and strengthening our resilience against them. Now, quick disclaimer, I am not a clinical psychologist. This section of the episode is a review and discussion of what peer-reviewed research suggests are the best ways to address imposter syndrome and also what I have personally tried and tested. If you are in need of professional therapy, please consult a clinical psychologist or counsellor. Now, starting with the shared mechanism of faulty cognitions, we can address this by challenging and then modifying these thoughts. Now, to challenge cognitions and then modify them, the process has to start with listening to your thoughts, of being aware when you are having imposter thoughts and recognizing them as faulty cognitions. Now, after the demure era last year, I really thought I would never say very mindful ever again, but here I am. The best way to become very aware is to be very mindful. Cringe, but it is actually supported by research. There is a robust body of research on how mindfulness exercises can serve as a tool for self-awareness and tapping into listening to your thoughts. The aim is to become aware so that you don't just accept all of your thoughts to be true. Because as outlined in one of my favorite books, Thinking Fast and Slow, heuristics such as cognitive ease and the illusion of validity lead us to believe that each of our thoughts and judgments are true without ever questioning them. Essentially, in order to challenge your faulty imposter thoughts, we must first become aware of them. Mindfulness exercises are things like meditation, body scans, grounding exercises, all the things we do to slow our minds down and focus on connecting to ourselves. Now, after recognizing your thoughts as faulty using mindfulness exercises, we can then challenge these thoughts and the assumptions that they are based on. We do this by looking at the quote-unquote evidence you have based your thoughts on. Is this evidence ambiguous? Am I interpreting this to mean something? Now, you can do this on your own by journaling twice about the same event. One, where you let your judgments and emotions and reactions and perceptions take over. That's the first time you journal, and you write down how you feel about everything. You don't question your thoughts, you just write them all down. And then you journal again about the same situation, but only with objective, cold, hard facts, or from the perspective of someone else in the situation. Now, when you look at these side by side, the discrepancies between the first and the second journal entry will show where you have made inferences, and then you can begin to challenge those assumptions. You can also challenge your thoughts and assumptions with a trusted group of people. Now, I know that sounds like it's coming from a cliche government pamphlet, but in the context of high achievement especially, I genuinely believe that it is imperative to have a selection of people that you deeply trust to tell you the truth, regardless of what you want to hear. And then when you intend to challenge your faulty thoughts, you can go to that person or those people and say, hey, do you think I'm out of my depth being an Olympic coach? Am I overthinking this? Am I catastrophizing? Or simply asking for constructive feedback from them to have more objective evidence to consider against your assumptions. Think of your view being the first journal entry and their view being the second journal entry. Next, I'd like to delve into the cultural imposter syndrome, which operates more on comparison than anything else, because I have this version on speed dial. We talk often, and like Tristan Thompson's scandals, never ends well. In these recent years, I have really pushed myself into the domains of my dreams, no matter how far-fetched they have seemed. And from these examples, I've chosen one for each type of imposter syndrome which I've experienced, one traditional and one cultural. Now, my traditional imposter syndrome moment was well after I had started my music career. I wrote and produced music for 3 years at that point. I traveled to Los Angeles and I had an informational interview with Justin Timberlake's writer and producer. After that conversation, I stopped writing and singing altogether for a year because of imposter syndrome. Who was I in a completely saturated market of artists who had far more connections, far more money, and probably more talent than me? However, in the same year, I placed top 50 in a global songwriting competition, which was the evidence that I deserved to be creating music. But I literally wrote that off as luck, that my song reached the headphones of a competition judge who had probably gotten some the night before and so was in a really good mood. Now, it's taken me a lot of time and conscious mental work to get back to writing music, and I will touch on how a little bit later. My cultural imposter syndrome moment was when I qualified as a Pilates instructor a few years ago, and after my first shift, I called my best friend crying and said, I can't do this. I can't do what other instructors do. Firstly, I'm not skinny. Secondly, I'm not blonde. And thirdly, I don't have a 2-piece set. Also, I don't have 300,000 followers on Instagram. And the response I got is forever inscribed in my heart. They said, okay, so you're not experienced yet. You can only do one thing. Be what the other instructors can't be. And that's be Kiara. Make them laugh while you teach them. And a few years on, it is now safe to say that my clients pay half for a great reformer class and half for 5-star stand-up comedy. I've experienced imposter syndrome in more domains of my life, but for these two, I am confident I've curated the antidote for imposter syndrome, because here I am starting my podcast and sharing it with the world when everyone and their uncle is asking you to rate their podcast. Unrelated, can you please rate my podcast? Thank you so much. Moving forward, my personal antidote for imposter syndrome is a mix of 4 ingredients: self-compassion, reminders of truth, the cookie jar, and celebrating yourself. Now that the dissection is over, we are going to move into the experiment for the lab, which is creating an antidote for imposter syndrome. Get your beaker. Got it? Awesome. This is so funny. I hope you're laughing too. We're going to start by adding 100 mils of self-compassion. I sincerely believe that self-compassion combats imposter syndrome more than anything else. Self-compassion is to treat yourself with the same kindness, understanding, and acceptance you would treat a loved one with. And in giving yourself this compassion, you are more likely to accept and celebrate your achievements and psychologically gear yourself to have stronger self-efficacy, which would make you more likely to accept challenges, ask for promotions, and accept opportunities you've been offered. Self-compassion is the gateway to living your life without compromising your value. I'm going to say that again. Self-compassion is the gateway to living your life without compromising your value. Next, we add 50 mils of knowing your truth. Being aware of your own potential and achievements, and then consistently checking in with that, is a way that I have personally used to mitigate symptoms of imposter syndrome, like the one I experienced when I went to Los Angeles and met this amazing producer, had a conversation with him about what it takes to be in the industry, and then I was basically paralyzed with imposter syndrome. And this is the strategy that I used to literally pull myself out of that cycle and that disgusting rut. And my sister and I actually developed this system together. And the concept is that your stronger self takes care of your more vulnerable self. You can do this by identifying when you are feeling really good, really strong about something that you have achieved. Say, for instance, when I released one of my songs and I got feedback from some girl that I barely know who said to me, hey, I was going through a really, really rough mental time and I couldn't make sense of my thoughts and my feelings, and the song you released literally gave me the words that I needed and the music that I needed to get through that really dark place in my life. And it filled me with the kind of happiness and fulfillment and joy that I don't even have the words for. And when you are feeling that way, when you're in that mindset, you sit yourself down and you write a letter. But the letter is addressed to your more vulnerable self. It's almost like the concept of saving food for an upcoming famine when the crops are coming in really well. I don't know anything about farming, but I hope you understand that. And so in that letter, you'll say, hey, Kiara, you just received a message from this person and your music is actually making an impact. The words that you curated helped someone come out of a really dark place, and that is a really great thing. So that when you're feeling that imposter syndrome, that, oh, I'm not good enough, or that, oh, it's just luck or whatever, then you can lean on the strength that you previously had when you're vulnerable. And I think that is a beautiful, beautiful way to know your truth and to remind yourself of the truth. Next, we have one large cookie jar. The next practical way to remind yourself of your worth and acknowledge your achievements is the David Goggins cookie jar. Now, I'm unsure if he had an actual cookie jar or if it was like a mental cookie jar, but I guess you could have both. The concept, if you haven't heard of it, is that you have this cookie jar, maybe physical, maybe mental, and every time you do something that's challenging, or maybe you put in every achievement, you write it down mentally or physically, you then close it up, put it into the cookie jar, and then when you're feeling vulnerable or when you need that kick or when you're doubting yourself, you literally put your hand into the cookie jar and you take out this thing and it reminds you, oh, I am capable of doing hard things. It is a very similar concept to your strong self taking care of your more vulnerable self. And it has worked wonders for me when it comes to the Pilates thing because, oh God, there is just like everybody and their uncle is a Pilates instructor these days. And so you can really get into your head when it comes to how worthy you are as an instructor. But I actually when people give me compliments, I write them down in my journal. And when I'm feeling like a really terrible teacher, I'll go back and I'll see someone say, Kiara, your classes are incredible. I changed my work schedule so that I can come to your classes. And that is just giving yourself that strength, taking that cookie out of the cookie jar when you need it. The final thing we're going to add is a sprinkle of celebrating your own achievements. Celebrating your achievements is crucial for acknowledging that you're actually responsible for your achievements. And if you're a high achiever, I'm looking at you. We can often skip this step because we work so hard to get that goal. And then when we get there, we rush to the next goal without taking the time to celebrate. I 120,000% did this with the marathon that I ran. Someone hoaxed me into doing a marathon, and it was petrifying. It was so scary, and the training going up to it, I remember struggling so much, and I remember being so afraid and so out of my depth. And even on the day, I was not sure if I was going to make it to the end, and then I did. And then after I did, literally on the same day, I got into the car and I was like, marathons aren't as hard as people say they are. And Kiara, shut up, because yes, it was. You were crying 6 kilometers ago. I think that that's such a great example of the fact that as soon as we've achieved something, as soon as it's actually a notch on our belt, we're like, yeah, it's actually pretty okay. It's because you kind of equalize to that level of achievement, and then you're always striving for more. But it is so important to take the time to first acknowledge that actually, yes, I achieved that, and it was an amazing thing that I did. And really important that celebrating doesn't have to be a party that you invite all your friends to every time you achieve something. Although if you do that, please do invite me. Celebrating can also just mean a celebratory ritual that you do by yourself. Treating yourself in a very small way just to signal to your brain that, hello, you have done this thing, and now you are being rewarded for the work and the dedication that you put in to achieve that goal. Now that we've added that final ingredient, you officially have your take-home imposter syndrome antidote. We can conclude our experiment there, and that closes our lab for today. Thank you so much for joining me in the Anatomy of Achievement. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, feel free to let me know, and I will see you in the lab on Monday. Don't be late.